Lord, the Bible says that the entrance of your words gives light and understanding. We ask, oh God, as we begin to learn, we ask for an open heart. We pray, oh God, that you will speak to us, you speak through us, you speak through our teacher, Lord, and Lord, at the end, your name alone will be glorified. In Jesus' mighty name we pray.
Praise the Lord. So we have to, most of the time that we can, it's very in high demand. I think it's during the week is the best time we can get in. So I want us to, as it comes to bless us, I want us to be very, very attentive. And like I said before, there's going to be a lot of wow moments, and I want us to pay very close attention to what it says, and I want us to take notes. Because that's why we brought him here, so we can dig deeper within. So that's why today is different from Sunday. So I want us, without taking too much of our time, I want us to help me to welcome not only Pastor G. The last time Pastor Joe was here, his wife was not here with him. So I want us to welcome his wife. I want us to rise up on our feet and let us welcome his wife as well. You're welcome. So without taking too much of our time, Pastor Joe can come.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'll get the microphone in 1 second. There we go. Now you can hear me? All right. So are we on Nigeria time tonight? It's the same thing in Liberia, no problem. Actually, I come from a Portuguese background. We're on Liberian and Nigerian time too, so it's okay. I'm glad you're here tonight, and thank you, Pastor, for the invitation to be able to come on a Tuesday night and take our time. Sunday, there's so many things happening in the service sometimes, and you're trying to get through it. And on these Tuesday nights, for 4 Tuesdays, it's this Tuesday, next Tuesday, the one after, and then on the 24th is but on the 31st. So the first 3 Tuesdays and the last Tuesday. Because on the 4th Tuesday, I have to fly out to Nova Scotia and drive home with my son. And it's a 20-hour drive, and I'm not sure if we're going to make it in time. So rather than be late, I said, let's just delay it 1 week, okay? So keep coming for the first 3 Tuesdays in March, and then on the 3rd Tuesday, I'll remind you that we're missing 1 Tuesday, but we're coming back the next Tuesday, okay? So I'm just going to take my time tonight. I have a lot of material to cover over the next several weeks. This is stuff that I've been learning since 2002. So I have 18 years worth of Bible studies to give you in 4 weeks. So we're not going to do it. There's no way we're going to cover it in 4 weeks, but it's going to give us a really, really good start, okay? And so I'm going to give you guys a couple of ground rules. Do you remember when I was here a few weeks back and I preached on a Sunday? I think it was right after Liberia. And I gave you one rule. I don't know if you remember. There you go. All right. So what are you going to do when you learn something new? Okay. Good. I'm glad you didn't forget. So we're going to have a lot of fun, I think, learning together. And so let me just kind of get right to it. For those of you, some of you have already been joining us, but make sure you follow me on Facebook or Instagram. Those are kind of the two big things, and we're always posting about what we're doing. I was in Israel last week. I spent 7 or 8 days in Jerusalem, and I did a lot of pictures and a lot of teaching videos. So if you enjoy what we do here on the Tuesday nights, also go to the YouTube channel. Okay, just youtube.com/Joe Amaral. And every month we're going to be releasing new teaching videos that I shot in Israel just last week when I was there. Okay? You can take a picture of the screen. It's just my name, my last name, Joe Amaral, is in everything. Okay? And as well, it's not for everybody, but okay, I'll let you. Did everybody get the picture? Not yet. One more over here. One more over here. Okay. All right, so now you got that. So every year we take a group to Israel, and this year we're going September 1st through the 10th, like we always go. And Karen, my wife, she'll be at the back, and there's some brochures there. So if that's of interest to you, just go back there, and there's all the information you need about the tour. And as well, everything I teach over these 4 weeks is in my book called Understanding Jesus, okay? So that'll also be at the back, and Karen will be there. And there's also some other resources. Just take some time and look through the book table, see if there's anything of interest to you. You can even use, the debit or credit card. There's one of those little tap machines back there. So if that's of interest to you, just make sure that you pop by, okay? So you guys ready to get wow? All right, let's do it. So tonight we're going to start by understanding Jesus. We all know Jesus? Yeah, 3 of you. Good. Right? You're followers of Jesus?
Yes.
Okay. And I said this the last time I was here, but how well do we really know him? Like if I were to say to you, close your eyes and think about Jesus, what's the first image that comes to your mind? If we had the time, and if you were good at drawing, I would ask you to come up and say, draw for me what you see. And I wonder how accurate we would be. Or have we allowed Hollywood and the West to paint for us what he actually looks like? I wonder how different he was than how we think he is. I wonder how much more of his teaching there is to discover than what we know now. And that's why Pastor asked me to come on these Tuesdays, is to take some time, get out the shovel, and we're going to dig a little bit deeper. We're going to go where you can't always go on a Sunday, because everybody's at a different level on a Sunday, but you took time to come out an extra night. So that means to me that you really want to learn. So that's why I have no problem. I don't care how many people are here or how few there are. I know that you're here because you want to learn. So I'm going to teach. And as long as you're willing to learn, I'm going to keep teaching. Okay? So we know the wow, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to show you a word that maybe you've heard before, maybe you haven't heard. This word idiom. Have you heard that word before? Okay, some of you have, some of you haven't. What's an idiom for those who know what it is? A proverb? A figure of speech. Okay, that's right on. It's a figure of speech, but even more to that, it's a figure of speech that works within a certain culture. Because there are things that are generally African, but then you get West African, but then you get Nigerian, and then you get tribal. The more close you go, the more there are sayings just from that culture. So to say, well, Jesus was from earth, okay. Well, Jesus was from the Middle East. Jesus was from Israel. Jesus was from the Galilee. Jesus was from Nazareth. And the tighter we go in, the more we realize there were idioms. There were figures of speech that they would say in Galilee that they wouldn't say in Jerusalem, and vice versa. Now, I've had the privilege of traveling all over the world. I've been to many, many countries. And I've learned that although we're all the same, that we're the human race, we are different, aren't we? And I don't just mean our skin. I don't just mean the outside. I mean like culturally. Like we're different than other people. And so I've learned that even the way I sit in a church has implications. Do you know that? When I went down to the Caribbean to preach in some churches there, I sat on the platform and I crossed my leg. And when I crossed my leg, the pastor hit my foot. I thought, what's this guy doing? So I did it again. I crossed my leg. He hit my foot. Ow, I hit myself hard. My ring hit my ankle. Did you hear that? Anyways, I said, what are you doing? He said, don't show them the bottom of your foot. In our culture, showing somebody the sole of your shoe is like putting a curse on them. But I'm in a Christian church. Still taking voodoo and mixing it in with Pentecostalism. And that wasn't that long ago. And that still happens today. So I've learned it's not just what I say, it's what I do. So even my hands, I don't know what to do with my hands sometimes. Because we all know in this part of the world, there's a certain finger on your hand that you can't show, right? But it's not bad in another part of the world. Here I can say, how's it going? Good. Right? I'm not going to tell you where, because you're going to look it up. But there's parts of the world that I can't show them my thumb, because that's like showing them the other finger. I said, what? So when I preach, I'm so nervous because I don't know what to do. Because I'm Portuguese, I use my hands, and I don't know if I'm offending anybody, so I have to preach like this. So if I offend you tonight, I'm sorry, I don't mean to. Okay? And so I've learned that culture is very, very important. What you say, what you do. You can even misunderstand somebody. Because you might go to a park and there's a big group of people and they're really loud. And you think, wow, those people are so rude, they're so loud. No, they're just Portuguese, they're loud. Right? Or no, okay, I didn't want to say. Right? So like when Karen and I first met, oh my goodness, it was hilarious because she comes from a nice, quiet Canadian family. You know, her mother's Irish, she's very proper. Her father comes from a Canadian British background, very proper. This is her father yelling. That's it. That's him angry. He's angry. And when I met her family, I remember thinking, what's wrong with these people? Like, they're so quiet. And when you sit down to eat, you know, the fork is here, and the knife is here, and the cup goes here, and the napkin goes on the lap. And I said, am I in a movie? Who eats like this? Oh, white people eat like this. Oh. Because in my house, you know, we didn't have like the proper fork and knife. I mean, God gave you a spoon, you took the potatoes out, right, and you passed the bread down the table. And we were just a very loud people, and we had to learn about each other's culture. At first, my family thought, what's wrong with Joe's girlfriend? She doesn't talk to anybody. And they thought, oh, does she think? No, she's just very quiet and very shy. And so after a while, we learned how to interact with each other. But as I began to travel, I began to realize, oh my goodness, I mean, when you go preach in China, it's different than preaching in America. Right? Preaching in Israel is different than preaching in the Caribbean. Preaching in the Caribbean is different than preaching in Vancouver. Right? Although we're all the human race, we're very, very different locally. And so sometimes when Jesus is teaching something, we look at it from our perspective and we forget, hang on a second, he's not Canadian. None of his disciples were Canadian. They'd never heard of the word Canada. And so why am I interpreting his teachings from within my own culture and not going back to his culture? And that's what we're going to do over these next several weeks. We're going to look at stories that you know. Remember on Sunday I preached about the prayer shawl. Remember the woman who touched the wing on his garment? Right? We kind of had this, wow, what? Well, every Jewish person knows that story. But here we are, way in the West, and we're trying to understand him, but we don't really even know him or his culture. So let me give you an example of how you can say something in one part of the world that makes sense, but you can't say it in another part of the world because they won't know what you mean. It was raining a little bit today. It was raining a little bit yesterday. Now, when it rains a lot, this guy got it right. You say, man, it's raining cats and dogs. How many people have ever said that before? Or have you heard that before? Okay, how many have seen a dog fall from the sky? Okay, no hands, thank God. Right? So if I said to you, oh, it was raining cats and dogs yesterday. Oh, no, I don't actually mean cats. I wouldn't have to explain it to you. You live here, you get it, you know it. But imagine a friend from back home comes to visit and they've never heard that saying before. And you say to them, quick, run to the car, it's going to rain cats and dogs. Could you imagine? Right? because they don't know it's just a figure of speech. It's just an idiom. And sometimes Jesus says things that were so local, they understood it, but by the time it gets to us, so imagine someone in Nigeria or China or a part of the world who'd never heard this before, and they try to spiritualize what cats and dogs really mean. And in their hearts, they're being sincere. They're trying to give it meaning, but the more meaning they give it, the further the way they get. Well, guess what? We've done that with a lot of Bible stories. You know that? We're sincere. We want to understand what Jesus says. And we say, whoa, in Canada, that would mean this. And so we kind of force it into the text. The truth is, we don't have to try so hard. If we'll learn what it's saying in its culture, it'll come alive, friends. And so that's what I want to do. So let me kind of skip through. There's lots of stuff. Have you ever heard somebody say, man, I was really in a pickle the other day? Have you heard that before? Is that new for anybody? Right? Man, I was in a pickle. What does it mean? In a jam. See, even that's an idiom. You don't even read, you said it so naturally, but that's an idiom. To say you were in jam. How do you get inside of jam? Right? Did you get here fast? Oh man, I flew here tonight. You took an airplane? You grew wings? What do you mean you flew here tonight? Yeah, but you know that. But if you told somebody, I work in Markham and I flew home to Milton, they'd say, wow, Pastor's rich, he has a plane. Okay. Okay, that wasn't a prophecy, but you can take it as that if you want. She'll take it. But you get what I mean. We say these things without even thinking of it. What are some other ones? You know, when you don't want a secret to get out, you say, don't let the cat out of the bag. But if somebody heard you say that, they say, why do you suffocate cats? How come you don't let them out of their bags? And when you laugh really hard, people will say, man, I laughed my head off. Right? I'm so hungry, I could eat a horse. Right? All these things you don't really think about. And so tonight, and for the next few weeks, we're going to look at these cats and dogs sayings. We're going to look at these in a pickle sayings that Jesus and his disciples would have totally understood. Because you have to remember that Matthew, Mark, and John specifically, they're Jewish men. And so they're writing to a Jewish audience. So they don't have to explain what these things mean because they know that their countrymen understand. Like, do you get that? But because it wasn't written, see, the Bible was written for us, but it wasn't written to us. You catch the difference? It was written for us, but it wasn't written to us specifically in Milton. They had no idea that when they were telling the story of their Messiah, that it would end up over here. They had no idea. So no explanation is given. So sometimes we read that Jesus, he writes in the ground 2 times, and then the men who were going to accuse the woman dropped their stone. And then we hear about, what else? Jesus sits in the synagogue, and everybody's staring at him, and then they try to throw him off of a cliff. Why would you throw a guy off a cliff? Because he sat down. We don't understand the synagogue. We don't know Judaism from that time. And so what I do is, what my gifting is to come into the church and show you what wasn't written because it didn't have to be written. It was just understood. But now we who love God and who want to dig deeper, you know, sometimes if you dig too deep, that can be dangerous too. Right? People dig so deep and, where am I? So we have to know where we're digging and what we're looking for when we dig. Like, we have to know where the treasure is. And the treasure is found in Jewish culture. So people say to me all the time, Joe, why do you talk about Israel so much and the Jewish culture so much? Listen, man, if Jesus was born in Nigeria, I would have become a Nigerian expert. You know, if he was born in Portugal, But he was born where? In Israel. He was crucified in Israel. He rose from the dead in Israel. Where's he going to return? Milton. House of David Milton. Right? Israel. So that's why we talk about Israel, not because it's better than any other country, not because the Jewish culture is better. No, because that was his culture. So I want everybody to, I don't want you to leave thinking, oh, Joe thinks that culture is better than my culture. No, that was the culture that made him who he was. And so what I want to do is I want to take you back. We're going to go back 2,000 years and we're going to understand one of the greatest things that Jesus did in the Gospel of John, but we don't know why he did it. And so I want to take some time this evening, even if we only get through one, that's okay. I don't take shortcuts when I teach the Bible. I don't give you just the good stuff that gets you excited. Sometimes you have to go through all the long way. But you do that so when you get to the end, you understand why you're there. So I don't want to just say stuff to make you excited and get you all, no, I want you to understand. So we're going to take our time and we're going to move through a story from the life of Jesus. And I'm hoping and praying that when we get to the end, you'll have a, oh, wow, or that's why. Okay, you guys ready? Yes. So if you have your Bibles, you can follow along, or you can just follow me here on the screen. And I'm going to read you the story, and then we're going to stop, and we're going to go back, and we're just going to kind of break it down, okay? So John chapter 8, starting in verse 3. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman who was caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. Now, so far, is there anything unusual that you can pick up on the text? Remember, this is a Bible study. It's not Sunday. It's okay. You can interrupt. I'm giving you permission. Is there anything that's happened so far that's a little odd to you? Huh? A couple? Where's the man? Okay. That's one. Okay. So the writing in the ground was unusual? Okay. He had no answer. Thank you. That's a great observation. So what does he do? So put it in our culture today. So let's say somebody is brought in from outside, and they bring him into the middle of our meeting, and they bring this person right to the front. We'll just say a woman because it's consistent with the story. So they're bringing this lady before me, and they say, "Pastor Joe, we caught this woman doing this thing, whatever it is. And according to the laws of the land, we have the right to execute her right here on the spot. But we want you to decide whether she lives or dies. Go." Right? So my decision is going to be whether she lives or dies. That's a pretty big responsibility. So instead of giving a response, so what if they brought the woman and I said, "Oh, 1 second, I'm getting a text." That's like what Jesus did. "Should we kill this woman?" 1 second, I got to write something. That's like me saying, "Hang on a second, let me check my Facebook." Like, would you do that? But yet Jesus does that. Why? So that's the first thing that's odd, right? Okay, but then the story continues. Well, they kept on questioning him, of course, because he didn't give an answer. "Should we put this woman to death? Should we put her to death?" Hang on a second. He keeps writing. So finally, he straightened up and he said to them, "Let any of you who was without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." But they haven't left yet, have they? The men are still there. Even when Jesus confronts them and says, "Anyone among you without sin, cast the first stone," but they stay. But look at verse 8. Again he stooped and he wrote on the ground. Now look at what verse says. At what? At this, but at what? What did he do? He wrote in the ground a second time. It wasn't what he said, it's what he did. Now, when you don't understand how rabbis taught in the first century, you don't know what's going on here. Rabbis, as a rule, never answer a question. They ask you a question. It's called question for question. It drives you crazy. You ask them a question, they think about it, they have an answer in their mind, and then they ask you a question. And you go back and forth, and it's question for question. And you don't actually give an answer, and this is what Jesus is doing. So again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground, and at that second time that he wrote, whatever he did, whatever he drew, whatever it was, that was enough. Because those who now heard began to go away, one at a time. The older ones first, until only Jesus was left with a woman still standing there. Everybody got the story? Now, we've probably heard this story before, right? Even if you don't understand the Jewish background, it's still a great story, isn't it? It's a story of Jesus' empathy and mercy and forgiveness, right? But what if I told you we could dig deeper and find something so much more profound? Would you want to know? How many want to know what Jesus wrote in the ground? Make sure you buy my book on the way out. Or wait 5 minutes and I'll tell you for free. Okay. That was good, right? Yeah. So this is John chapter 8 that this story takes place. If you want to know... Oh, by the way, I can tell you from this chapter exactly what day this happens on and exactly where it happens. Do you see it? No? From this verse, I can tell you exactly when it happened and where. Watch this. Does it say Sabbath? Okay. Okay. Okay, that's a really good guess. That's a very good guess. Okay, so let me show you the context to John chapter 8. Of course, it's John chapter 7. In John chapter 7, he says something that if you don't understand the culture, it just kind of goes over your head and you don't even pick up on it. And this is what we want to do. This is why I've been asked to come. Is I want you to now see the scripture in a different way. So when you read it now, I don't want you to look at it through the lens of a 21st century person living in Canada. But when you see something that doesn't seem right, or something that's repeated twice, or something that seems a little bit out, there's a reason for it. I want you to put on your first century lens. Because in John chapter 7, verse 37, it says this. On the and day of the... Okay, let's stop there. So whatever is about to happen, it happened on the last and great day of the festival or the feast. So on this day, Jesus stood up and he says, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink." Again, it's a beautiful saying, isn't it? Anyone who is thirsty, come to me and drink. And that's beautiful. But when you understand what happened on the last and greatest day of the feast, it's even more wow. But here's the problem. We don't know what the festival is that he's talking about. The feasts of the Lord. Do we know about the feasts of the Lord? You've heard about them, right? How many feasts are there? It's between 1 and 10. It rhymes with heaven. Hey, good guess. So there are 7 feasts. Ready? Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Pentecost, trumpets, atonement, and tabernacles. Now your turn. No? Maybe next week? So Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Pentecost, trumpets, atonement, and Tabernacles. So what's the last feast? Okay, now we're getting somewhere. So there's 7 feasts. The last one is Tabernacles. The Feast of Tabernacles is the only feast that has 7 days. And the last day is called the Great Day. You see, if we just do a little bit of research and a little bit of Old Testament reading, the answers are there. Because Jesus draws on the Old Testament. Guess what? There was no New Testament when he was alive. Some people get mad at me for that. Jesus didn't read the book of Revelation. Didn't exist. What did he do? He referred to what we call the Old Testament. In Hebrew, it's called the Tanakh. Okay, the Tanakh is what he refers to. And so if we go back into the Old Testament, we realize there are 7 feasts, but there's one feast that has a final great day, and that's the Feast of Tabernacles. Just that alone is going to help us to understand why Jesus said what he did on that last day. So John says it was the last day. Why didn't Jesus go on the first day of the feast? What do you think? Why didn't he go the week after the feast? Before that was the Day of Atonement, a very sacred holiday. Why didn't he go on that day? Why does Jesus show up on that specific day? Again, you go before that. See, we're going backwards to get our answer to go forwards. John chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. I'm going to take the time to read this to you. It says, after this, Jesus went around in Galilee. He did not want to go about in Judea because the Jewish leaders there were looking for a way to kill him. But when what? The festival of? That's what we just said. So he knew the Feast of Tabernacles was coming. But when the Feast of Tabernacles was near, Jesus' brothers said to him, leave Galilee and go down to Judea, which is where Jerusalem was, so that your disciples there may see the works you do. No one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. Since you are doing these things, go, show yourself to the world. They're trying to get him to go down. For even his own brothers did not believe in him. Therefore, look what Jesus told them. My time is what? Not yet here. They're trying to push him. He says, not yet. But go, show yourself. Not yet. My time is not here. For you, any time will do. See, the world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify that its works are evil. He goes, you go to the festival. He goes, I'm not going up to this festival because my time has not yet fully come. But after he said this, he stayed in Galilee. However, after his brothers had left for the festival, he went also, not publicly, but in secret. So they didn't know he was coming. He said, I'm going to stay up here in Galilee. They went down for the feast. So Jesus delays his time to go down to Jerusalem. From Galilee to Jerusalem, it's about a 7-day walk. Today we can drive it in 2.5 hours on the main highway with no traffic. But in those days, it was 6 to 7 days to make the journey. And he waits, and he waits, and he waits. And then John says that it was on the last and great day of the feast, now we know, of Tabernacles. So he leaves on the first day, and by the 7th day he arrives in the city. And he goes here to the temple. This is a model. This is just a recreation of what the temple would have looked like in the time of Jesus. So right now, you don't know it, but we're on the Mount of Olives, which is on the west side, and we're looking down at the eastern gates. We're looking down at the eastern entrance. And so this is the eastern gate coming into the city. Down here, there were several gates in the south, and all over the city, we have entrances. And we come up here to the great court, or the outer court. There's a song we used to sing. I will enter with thanksgiving in my heart. I will enter his court. They're talking about going to the temple. You would enter his gates, and then you would go onto the courts. It was going to temple. We don't even think about that. This was the mega church for the Jews at the time. This was the place where you went to be in God's presence. Now, I can tell you, well, let me tell you first a little bit about this. So this is called the outer court. Everybody got that? Now, you can kind of see it here. I'll go one slide closer, okay? Now you see that there? And you can see it on this side here as well. That's a little 3-foot fence. And that fence divided the outer court from the inner court. Now the outer court, everybody was allowed to go there. Jews, non-Jews, men and women, priests and non-priests, everybody was allowed to go. Because God said, my house is a house of prayer for all nations. Anybody can come and pray. But only men, Jewish men, could go past that barrier. Now they found a sign from 2,000 years ago that used to be attached to that fence, written in 3 different languages, and it said, no Gentiles or women pass this point under penalty of death. Remember Paul talks about Christ tearing down the wall? It was a literal wall. It wasn't just a spiritual saying. Although it was spiritual, there also was a physical wall that would separate men and women, Jews and non-Jews. And so you have the outer court, and then you have the inner court. It's a little hard to see here, but these are steps going into here. So these steps lead into this part called there's 2 chambers. You're close. Okay, so outer court, inner court, the holy place, and then inside here was the Holy of Holies. Thank you, that's better. Okay, so outer court, inner court, holy place, inside here, the Holy of Holies. Only the high priest was allowed to go there, right? One day of year on Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement. So, look at the pattern. The Day of Atonement in the Holy of Holies, that's where God's presence was. Right between the wings of the angels, he said, I will dwell there. So if you notice, the closer you got to God, the more restricted the access became. It was men, it was priests, then it was only the high priest one day a year. So the woman caught in the act of adultery, where is she? Is she in the Holy of Holies with the high priest? No? Is she allowed to be in the holy place? Is she allowed to be in the inner court? Where's the only place the woman could be in the temple area? The outer court. Okay. So we know then that Jesus meets the woman somewhere here in the outer courts. So that's the where. Now let me give you the when. On the last and great day, the priest would leave the temple area and they would follow this path down here, because there was an underwater spring that would come down here and it would spring up at the bottom. See the pool here? That's the pool of Siloam. You've read about it in the Bible, right? The pool of Siloam was spring-fed. And springs are a form of living water. There's 3 forms of living water. There's rain, there's rivers, and there's springs. Not a lot of rain in Jerusalem. No rivers in Jerusalem. But there are a couple of springs. And where the springs are, those are sacred spaces, because you need living water, not just to live physically, but to live spiritually. You needed it for the practices. And so on that last day, the priest would follow this path down. He would get to the pool of Siloam, and he would take an empty container and he would dip it into the pool. It would be filled now with living water, and he would go back up to the temple area. And when he got back up to the temple, in here, in the holy place, They would have an altar there, and the priest would take that water. Now, you hear all the stuff that I'm telling you? Did you know this stuff before? Every Jewish person knew it already back then. The moment they said it was the last and great day, oh, Jesus came on tabernacles, they would have known right away. Now watch what happens on the last and great day of the feast. The priest pours out the water on the altar. And it's like the priest is saying to God, Lord, would you send us your living water? And I want you to think about what happened. When the priest was saying, God, send us your living water, who shows up? Jesus, and he says, drink of me. Oh, come on. Come on. On the last and greatest day of the feast, when the high priest was pouring out the living water, Jesus stood and said, you don't need that water. Because if you drink that water, you'll be thirsty tomorrow. But he said, I will give you water, and you'll never thirst again. In fact, he who believes in me, there will be what? Rivers of what? Living water flowing out of him. See, you won't have to wait for tabernacles. You won't have to wait to go down to the pool. If you receive my teaching, it's like there'll be a source of living water within you. Come on. You see? All that is sitting there. But the church has missed it completely. Why? Because we're terrible people? Why? Because we don't want to know? Because we didn't even know it was there. And see, this is the call that God has placed on our lives. We've traveled the world doing this. In church after church, in culture after culture, and everyone has the same reaction. Wow, we didn't know it was there. Now, there's a little bit more to the story. You see, Jesus was a man, right? So he was allowed to be in the inner court. He came from a royal family, from the House of David. He could actually even be in the holy place where the priest was pouring the water. Now, when he stood and said, I'm the living water, did they accept him? They didn't, right? It would have been a different story. If he would have stood up and said, I'm the living water, and they would have said, great. The Middle East would be different today. But they didn't say great, did they? They said, you're not the living water. You're claiming to be the water from heaven that God is sending to the earth? Out. They kick him out of the inner court. And Jesus finds himself where? In the outer court. And now the story takes place in John chapter 8. But if you don't know any of that background, you don't get the full power of John 8. Remember I said we're going to take the long way around? Okay, we're taking the long way. But now we're coming to the end. And when we come to the end, this is where we have the wow and the what he wrote. So we have all this background. It was the last day. They're calling for the living water. He claims to be that water. They reject him. And now they bring this woman. And what does he do? He stoops. And what does he do? He begins to write something on the ground, right? Now, what specifically did he write? I can't tell you 100% sure what he wrote. But I have a very strong feeling what he was doing. As a rabbi, they would use a method called hinting. They would never come right out and tell you the answer, because if I told you the answer, I rob you of the journey of discovery. So a rabbi would bring you right to the edge and let you make the discovery for yourself. So it's called remez, to hint. So I believe that when Jesus stooped down, he wrote something from the scriptures that pushed them to have a realization. And what was it? Look at Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 13. If you didn't know the background, none of this would make any sense. But now read it with these new eyes. This is a prophecy that God is giving Jeremiah. And he says, Lord, you are the hope of Israel. All who forsake you will be put to shame. Those who turn away from you, those who reject you, will be what? Written in the dust because they have forsaken or rejected the Lord, who's who? The spring of living water. Come on. The prophecy is literally, one day I will appear in the temple on the last and great day, and I will tell them that I am their living water, and they're going to reject me. And after they reject me, I'm going to write their names in the dust of the earth. Come on. When Jesus began to write, are you getting it? When Jesus began to write in the dust, I believe he was pushing them towards the Jeremiah 17 passage, because by age of 13, every Jewish male had the whole Old Testament memorized. And all he had to do was start writing the first part of the verse, and they would know where he was going with it. When he began to write that, they would have said, we don't know who he is, but we know who he thinks he is. He thinks he's the Lord, who's the source of living water. And he thinks we've just rejected him. And they drop their stones from the oldest to the youngest, because that's the way they recorded the names of membership in the synagogue. And from oldest to youngest, they drop their stones and they go. And that's when it picks up, and Jesus turns to the woman and he says, where are your accusers? She says, there are none. And he says, well, I don't accuse you either. Go and sin no more. What? But that's what this kind of teaching does. The learning about the Hebraic or the Jewish roots of our faith, it doesn't make us Jewish. It doesn't mean we have to become Jewish. None of us have to leave Christianity and start practicing Judaism. No, not at all. But once we appreciate the culture that gave birth to Jesus and our faith, it just helps us to have a better understanding. You have a better understanding now of this passage, don't you? See, all that stuff, I just spent 45 minutes telling you that. And John doesn't say a word because he assumed his audience was Jewish. And that the moment he referenced it, everybody would have known. But for those of us who love God and who want to understand his word, we're just so removed. We're too removed from time. Now on Monday, not yesterday, but a week yesterday, I was there. I was at the temple. I was just beside that pool of Siloam, knowing that I was going to be teaching this tonight. And so as I'm teaching it to you, I can see it. I can still feel it. And even if you don't get a chance to go to Israel, I'm praying that as we spend these few weeks together, that you'll have a better understanding, not just of who Jesus was, but what he was teaching, what he was saying. You know, it's like for those of us, there's not like anybody here 70 or older? No? Nobody 70, okay. Oh, there's one. There she is. There she is. Do you remember the first TV you ever saw? No? It's a long time ago, right? Well, the first TVs were black and white, right? These little tiny things. And when black and white television came out, that was the height of technology. It will never get better than black and white. People moving inside a box in your house, it'll never get better than this. Fast forward a couple of decades, the first color TV came out. Wow. Now, you watch the same movie on a color TV, same story. But now details jump out. Oh, the car was red. Her dress was blue. His hair was, right? Same exact story. But with a better camera, now you can see things a little more detail, and we thought it'll never get better. When we got married 30 years ago, we had a 20-inch screen TV. I was the envy of all my friends because the standard size was 13. We had 20. Yeah, I know. For all the kids laughing, 20 inches, that TV was $1,000 in 1990. Yeah. And we thought, why would you ever need a TV bigger than 20 inches? This is huge. And then they came out with digital televisions, and then they came out with high definition and HD televisions, and now they've come out with 4K televisions, and now they have 8K televisions. No, but now there's above 4K, there's 8K. What's next? You know what's next? They're going to show up to your house. Now you take the same movie and you watch it across all those platforms, and the better the resolution, even now with the 4K TVs, you can see the people in the background, you can see the license plates, you can see the features on the people's faces. That's what we're doing. It's the same stories that you've grown up with. Nothing changes. Jesus is still Jesus. His miracles are his miracles, but we're giving you an 8K view of his miracles. So now the background that seemed to be blurry, now you realize it's not background, it's actually part of the story. So when Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John give you these details that don't seem to matter, they actually do matter. And over the next 3 weeks together, friends, we're going to take some time and we're going to re-look at these events through that 8K or that 4K lens. And those details that didn't seem important, they're going to jump off the page at us, and they're going to help us to have a better understanding of Jesus. I hope you'll join me over the next few weeks as we take our time and we dig a little deeper and we understand Jesus a little better. Amen? Amen. Amen. Pastor, I'm going to ask you to come. Now, I want you to be here next Tuesday, 7 o'clock Canadian time. And bring a friend. Let's fill this place with people. I don't want people who don't care. I want people who are hungry, who want to go deeper. And now that you've heard, maybe you'll say, oh, I wish my friend was here. Oh, I wish my... Now you know. Let them know. Let's come back again next Tuesday and let's dig a little deeper. Amen.
Let's appreciate Pastor Joe. Thank you. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Let us rest upon our feet. I pray and I hope that we've learned something today. And like Pastor Joe said, we are not rewriting scripture. We are not. We are just. We are going deeper into the scripture. We are looking at it from OLED, organic LED, 8K TV. So to see the details, so we begin to speak with understanding. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Let's quickly bring out our offering. Let's quickly take our offering. Very conscious of time. I don't want to take too much of our time. So let's quickly take our offering.